Terri Williams stepped out of her car, the soft hum of her luxury SUV echoing in the quiet parking lot. The sun beat down on the small mechanic shop, Harris Auto Repair, a place that had always been a local favorite for its honest, no-frills reputation. She had been to the shop a few times before, but today, things were different. Today, something was going to change. As she walked towards the entrance, she wasn't expecting much. Just a quick fix on her vehicle, maybe a half-hour wait while they checked the brakes. It should have been routine. In fact, routine. But as the door swung open and she stepped inside, she was immediately struck by the coldness of the atmosphere. The mechanic, Mike Harris, looked up from his workbench, his greasy hands wiping the remnants of oil off onto a rag. Terri smiled politely, but her greeting was met with something else. Mike's gaze was dismissive, almost mocking as he sized her up. There was an arrogance in the way he looked at her, one she had encountered countless times in her career, but it still irked her every time. He didn't know who she was, but she knew exactly what he saw. A woman in a high-end suit, stepping into a place like this to have her fancy car worked on. His response was almost casual, like she didn't even deserve his full attention. "Mike," without looking up, "you might want to take that somewhere else. We don't really work on cars like yours." Terri froze. She had been expecting a quick assessment, maybe some small talk about the issue with her brakes, but this was a slap in the face. Her stomach twisted for a moment, not because of what he said, but because it was so familiar. It was the kind of judgment she had fought against for years, the kind of disrespect that had followed her all her life, just waiting to rear its ugly head whenever she least expected it. She had gotten used to being underestimated, dismissed. But today she wouldn't let it slide. Terri felt the pressure building, her jaw clenching in quiet frustration. She had been managing Terry's auto sales for over 15 years, and the weight of everything she had built was resting on her shoulders. Her dealership, now worth millions, had not come without countless battles against others who doubted her, against the deep-seated biases of an industry where women were far too often seen as outsiders. She had worked her way to the top, rising above every limitation, every doubt. And yet, here she was, standing in front of a mechanic who saw her as nothing more than a rich woman, who didn't know the first thing about cars. The nerve of it. She was a businesswoman and owner, a leader in her field, and yet she still faced this kind of disdain from people like Mike, who judged her based on nothing more than a brief look. Terri wasn't someone to take things lying down, especially not when it came to her own worth. She had spent too many years proving herself to let a mechanic dictate her place in this world. She took a deep breath, pushing back the frustration that threatened to bubble to the surface. There was a calmness about her now, an unshakable steadiness. This wasn't just about fixing a car. This was about standing up for herself. Terri forced a smile, even as she felt the anger simmering beneath the surface. Mike still hadn't looked up from his workbench, continuing to wipe the grease from his hands onto the rag, completely oblivious to the rising tension in the room. "Terri," patiently, "I'm sorry, but I think you misunderstood me. I'm the owner of Terry's Auto Sales down the street. I need my car looked at. It's having some issues with the brakes and engine. I'm sure you can help with that." She held her ground, her voice calm but firm. She wanted to make sure he heard every word she said. This was not about her car, it was about respect. She was done being treated like an outsider, like she didn't belong. Mike's movements froze for a moment. His hands slowly lowered the rag. His eyes flicked up, registering something in her words. But it wasn't enough. He still couldn't fully process what she had said. He looked at her for the first time, really looking at her now. Her professional suit, the confidence in her posture, her steady, unwavering gaze. But even then, he couldn't hide his skepticism. Mike, pausing, clearly unsure, "Wait, you own Terry's Auto Sales?" Terri, nodding with quiet authority, "Yes, I do. And I expect to be treated with the same respect as any other customer." For a moment, Mike stood there, the wheels turning slowly in his head. The realization seemed to hit him, but too late. He had already made his assumptions, and now he had to swallow them. The weight of what he had said, the way he had dismissed her, it all sank in. The shop, the space, the job that had always seemed so familiar to him, everything was suddenly smaller, as if he were looking at it from the outside for the first time. Terri's gaze didn't waver as she stared at Mike, her calm but unyielding eyes locking onto his. She wasn't angry, no, her anger had long been replaced with something much stronger: resolve. She had reached a point in her life where petty grievances didn't consume her anymore. The fight to prove herself had been long, tiring, and brutal, but it had also been empowering. She had lived through and overcome countless obstacles that no one could truly understand unless they had walked in her shoes. For most of her life, Terri had faced prejudice. It had come in many forms, subtle and overt, like the weight of invisible barriers that stood in her path whenever she tried to move forward. Growing up, people told her she wasn't enough, that she couldn't be both a mother and a businesswoman, that she couldn't balance the delicate line between ambition and family, between strength and femininity. The world had, time and time again, sent the message that women like her didn't belong in spaces like this, spaces of power and influence, spaces dominated by men who built their empires without question, without the same scrutiny she faced daily. But Terri had learned early that the world wasn't going to hand her respect on a silver platter. If she wanted it, she would have to fight for it, to earn it, time and time again. No one had ever given her anything for free. Everything she had, everything she'd built, she had built with her own hands, and it had cost her time, energy, friendships, and even her own peace of mind at times. But despite the price, it had been worth it. For years she had been told no, dismissed, underestimated, and overlooked. She had walked into boardrooms where people thought she didn't belong, had been given the pretty face treatment, as if her thoughts and ideas weren't valid simply because of her gender and race. But every no had only fueled her determination to prove them wrong. Every you can't had pushed her to do it anyway. And every single time she stood up to the challenge, she found herself one step closer to the woman she was now, someone who refused to be overlooked, someone who had earned her place at the table and would not let anyone take that from her. And yet, here she was, standing in front of Mike, a mechanic who didn't even know her name, judging her based on a quick glance at her clothes and her car. It wasn't surprising. This was something she had dealt with her entire career, but it still stung. It reminded her that no matter how far she'd come, she would always be fighting to be seen for who she really was. Her hands rested at her sides, steady and composed. She had learned to channel her frustration into something more powerful, a quiet confidence, a strength that didn't need to shout to be heard. She knew that this moment, this interaction, was just another reminder of the long road she had traveled. But it was also a reminder that the fight wasn't over. She still had to stand her ground. She wasn't just fighting for respect from Mike or from anyone else who underestimated her. She was fighting for herself, for the years she had spent proving that she deserved to take up space in this world, that she deserved to stand tall. This wasn't just about fixing her car. It wasn't about the broken brakes or the engine trouble. This was about reclaiming her place, a place that had been constantly challenged. For all the success she had achieved, for all the growth her dealership had experienced, there was still this deep, painful reminder that she was still viewed as different, as less than, by people who couldn't see beyond the surface. But she wasn't going to let that diminish her. Every time someone treated her as though she didn't belong, she would rise to the occasion, more determined than before. This moment, small as it may have seemed, was yet another opportunity for her to prove that she would never back down. She was done fighting to prove herself to others. It was time to fight for herself. She didn't need Mike to validate her worth. She had already done that. She took a deep breath, her voice unwavering but sharp with purpose as she addressed Mike. The words came out slowly, each one deliberate and firm. Terri, calmly, it's not about being treated as special, Mike. It's about being treated as an equal. Something you've yet to learn. She could feel the power of her words land between them. There was no malice in her voice, but there was a quiet strength in them, something that Mike hadn't expected. He probably thought she was just another customer, one who would back down when faced with resistance. But Terri wasn't like the others. She wasn't going to let his small-mindedness define who she was. And she wasn't going to let him get away with diminishing her in front of anyone. Terri wasn't angry anymore. Her anger had long been channeled into something much more dangerous. Her calm was her power. She could see the confusion flickering in Mike's eyes as her words took root, his expression slowly changing from dismissive to something else, a recognition of what he had just done, and an awareness that he had underestimated the woman standing before him. But it was too late to undo the damage. Mike shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his actions bearing down on him. He hadn't expected this from her. He had assumed she was just another woman with a fancy car, one who wouldn't know the difference between a brake pad and a spark plug. But Terri had been underestimated her whole life. It was nothing new to her. And in this moment she was ready to show him that her worth wasn't defined by the narrow view of a mechanic who couldn't see past her appearance. Her hands were still steady at her sides, but now they felt stronger, like they had been wrapped around the core of her self-belief. She didn't need Mike's approval. This moment wasn't about changing his opinion, it was about showing herself that she had earned her place, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. It was a reminder that she was always worthy of respect, no matter where she went. Mike's eyes flitted between her and the car, trying to figure out how to proceed, but it was clear now that the power had shifted. This wasn't just about the car, it was about the way the world had so often tried to make her feel smaller than she was. It was a reminder that the world still saw her through a lens of assumptions, but Terri had spent her life proving that she was much more than anyone expected, and she would keep proving it every single day. Terri stood her ground, her expression serene, as if nothing in the world could shake her. She was a businesswoman, a mother, a leader, and no mechanic, no matter how skilled, was going to reduce her to anything less than that. Not today, not ever. The silence between them stretched, thick with tension. Mike stood there, his hands frozen in mid-air, the rag he'd been holding still dangling from his fingers. His mind was scrambling to process what had just happened. He had expected a confrontation, maybe a heated argument, or even a hasty retreat. What he hadn't expected was Terri's quiet, unshakable confidence, her strength in the face of his dismissiveness. And in that moment he realized just how badly he had misjudged her. Mike had been so quick to judge, to lump her into the category of rich woman with a nice car, that he hadn't even bothered to look deeper. He hadn't considered that this woman, standing in front of him, wasn't just another customer. She wasn't just someone who could throw money at her problems to make them go away. She was a force in the industry, someone who had earned her success through sheer determination and an unwavering commitment to her work. As the realization hit him, Mike felt the weight of his mistake. Terri wasn't just a woman with money, she was a businesswoman who had built her empire from the ground up. She was the embodiment of hard work, resilience, and ambition. Mike had failed to see that before, but now he couldn't ignore it. In that moment, the mechanics of power shifted. He was no longer in control, she was. Her words had cut through his defenses like a sharp blade. Mike had been used to holding the reins, to being the one in charge, but standing here before Terri, he understood for the first time that his power was fleeting. It wasn't in the tools he used or the years of experience he had, it was in how he treated people, how he saw them. And he had completely misjudged Terri. Terri didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence was enough. She didn't demand respect with loud proclamations or bravado, she commanded it with quiet authority. Mike cleared his throat, his voice barely a whisper, still processing what he'd just heard. His pride, which had once been a wall of defense, now felt like a weight around his neck. He had never been the type to apologize easily, but as he looked at Terri, there was no other option. She had put him in his place without raising a finger, without a single unnecessary word. His apology wasn't just about the car, it was about realizing the bigger picture, acknowledging that he had made a fundamental error in how he viewed the world. Mike, mumbling, still not fully believing it, I didn't know. I'm sorry, Ms. Williams. I just assumed I don't know. His words were halting, disjointed, as if they couldn't come out fast enough. He had been so quick to jump to conclusions, to make assumptions about who Terri was, that now he felt foolish. Terri didn't need to hear an explanation. She didn't need him to justify his actions. All she wanted was for him to understand that this behavior wasn't acceptable. It wasn't about the apology. It wasn't about him. It was about the principle of being respected, not because of who he thought she was, but because of who she truly was. Terri, interrupting with quiet authority, you assumed wrong. But I'll give you the opportunity to fix the car. Just don't make the same mistake again. Her voice was calm, steady, unshaken. There was no anger in her words, just a quiet firmness that carried more weight than any heated exchange could. She wasn't asking for an apology from him, and she wasn't interested in a performance of remorse. What mattered was that he understood the gravity of his mistake, the mistake of assuming that someone's worth could be determined by their appearance or their car. Terri wasn't here to teach him humility. She was here to show him that respect couldn't be earned by assumptions. Respect was earned through understanding, through seeing people for who they truly were, not for who you thought they might be. Mike's face reddened, his hands fidgeting nervously as the gravity of the moment settled in. He had grown up around mechanics who judged people based on what they drove, what they wore, and the kind of money they flashed around. But Terri was different. She didn't need to flaunt anything to show her worth. She was already established, already powerful, and she was willing to give him the chance to right his wrong. Mike quietly, regretfully, "You're right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you." Terri gave him a small nod, her eyes never leaving his face. She didn't need to hear any more from him. His apology, though sincere, wasn't necessary. What mattered was that Mike had learned something in that moment, a lesson that would stick with him far longer than any verbal confrontation ever could. She didn't want him to grovel, didn't need him to beg for her forgiveness. She simply needed him to understand that underestimating her, or anyone else, was a mistake he couldn't afford to make again. Terri had done what was necessary. She had reclaimed her space. She had shown him that she was not someone who could be dismissed or written off. She wasn't just another customer, another woman with money. She was Terri Williams, the owner of one of the most successful luxury car dealerships in the region, and she deserved respect because she had earned it. Without another word, Terri turned to leave. She had made her point. She didn't need to say anything else. Mike stood there, still processing, feeling the sting of his own pride as he realized that his assumptions had cost him more than he expected. But Terri didn't need to witness that. She already knew the lesson had been learned. As she walked to her car, her steps were measured, confident, and steady. She had fought for her place in this world, and in that small moment she had reminded Mike of a lesson that he would never forget. You cannot judge a person by what you see on the surface, and you certainly cannot underestimate those who have already proven themselves worthy of respect. Her car started with a smooth hum, the engine purring beneath her, as she drove away from Harris Auto Repair, leaving behind a man who would think twice before underestimating anyone again. As Terri turned to leave, the heavy air in the mechanic shop felt different. The tension that had once been palpable, swirling around like an electric current, had softened. There was no lingering bitterness, no desire for petty revenge. Terri knew the battle was already won, not through a fiery confrontation, but through the quiet strength she had shown in simply standing her ground. Her presence, calm yet powerful, had shattered the assumptions Mike had held so firmly. She had made sure he understood one thing above all else. He would no longer have the luxury of making assumptions about anyone who walked through his doors. The walk toward her car felt different this time. Every step she took was measured, steady, as if the ground beneath her feet was somehow firmer, more certain. She wasn't walking away from the situation in defeat, she was walking away in victory. Not the kind of victory that came from beating someone down with words or actions, but a victory born from the simple, unshakable knowledge that she had reclaimed her place. Mike, still processing the weight of the moment, stood frozen for a second. He wasn't used to feeling small. He had always been the one in charge in his world, a world of grease-stained hands and engines. But here, in front of Terri, he had been forced to confront his own narrow-mindedness, and it stung. The realization of how badly he had misjudged her wasn't lost on him. He had never seen her as anything more than another woman in a nice car, someone who didn't belong in his world. But now, standing in the quiet aftermath of the conversation, Mike understood something deeper. Terri wasn't just another customer. She wasn't just a woman with money or someone to be dismissed because of her gender. She was a force, someone who had proven herself time and time again, someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The lesson hit him like a freight train, knocking down the walls of his assumptions. As Terri reached the door, ready to walk out and continue on with her day, Mike finally found his voice, his tone shifting from casual arrogance to something quieter, more humble. He couldn't let her leave without acknowledging what had just happened. Mike calling out to her a bit more humbly, "I'll take care of it. No more mistakes. Your car's in good hands." There was a long pause. The words were enough to make Terri stop, her hand on the door handle. But she didn't turn back right away. She was still in control. Her expression softened just slightly, the corner of her mouth curling into a small, knowing smile. It wasn't a smile of triumph, not one of gloating or rubbing in the fact that she had won. It wasn't about winning. It was about knowing when to walk away. Terri knew that she didn't need Mike's apology, nor did she need him to beg for forgiveness. What mattered was that he had learned something. And in that knowledge, Terri found a deeper satisfaction, one that didn't come from proving her point with harsh words, but from the quiet power of showing someone their own limitations and making them see the truth. She turned, her smile now softening, the weight of the moment sinking in. This wasn't a game to her. It wasn't about making Mike feel bad or proving that she was somehow superior. It was about demanding the respect she had earned, not just for herself, but for anyone else who had ever been underestimated or judged too quickly. Terri wasn't interested in revenge, she was interested in respect. Terri, softly, with a calm but powerful finality, "Thank you. I'll hold you to that." The words weren't harsh, but they carried the weight of everything she had gone through in her life, the battles, the struggles, and the victories that had brought her here. She wasn't asking for anything special. She simply wanted to be seen for who she was, and now Mike had finally begun to see her. Terri walked out of Harris Auto Repair with her head held high. Her footsteps were steady and sure as she approached her car, the same car that had sparked this entire interaction. As she slid into the driver's seat, the engine roared to life, and the hum of the motor filled the quiet air. She didn't look back. Mike stood there for a moment, his eyes still following Terri as she drove away, his mind racing. He had never had an encounter like this before. In his world, power came from hands that could fix anything, that could take a broken-down engine and make it run again. But Terri's power didn't come from tools or machines, it came from within her. It came from a place of quiet strength, of knowing who she was and never needing anyone else's validation to prove it. Mike's regret was deep, but it wasn't just about how he had treated Terri, it was about how he had been treating everyone. He had judged people by the surface, by what they looked like and what he assumed about them. But Terri had shown him the real lesson: respect wasn't something you gave based on appearances. It was something you gave based on the person in front of you, the story they carried, the journey they had been on. He had a lot to think about, a lot to change. And as Terri's car disappeared around the corner, Mike took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the lesson settle in. He would never forget the woman who had walked into his shop, expecting only a simple repair, and walked out having taught him a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. It was a lesson in humility, in respect, and in truly seeing people for who they were. Mike had no choice but to let that lesson sink in, and for the first time in a long while he was humbled. Terri's smile lingered as she drove away, but it wasn't just about the small victory of standing her ground, it was about the bigger picture. She had shown Mike, and herself, that power wasn't always about confrontation. Sometimes power was knowing when to walk away, when to let your presence speak for itself, and when to demand the respect you deserve without ever having to ask for it. And in that quiet moment of victory, Terri knew that no matter where she went, or who she encountered, she would always stand tall. Because respect wasn't given, it was earned, and she had earned every inch of it. Within the hour, Terri's car was fixed and ready for her to take back. The task was simple: replace the brake pads, check the engine. Mike, though still somewhat embarrassed by the earlier interaction, had managed to complete the job efficiently. The work was done well, and Terri could feel the steady hum of the engine as she turned the key in the ignition, hearing the smooth sound that confirmed everything was as it should be. Mike watched her as she approached the counter to pay. There was no fanfare, no grand gestures. Terri didn't need to say anything more. The moment had already passed. She had already made her point. It was as if her very presence had shifted something in the room, and now everything had returned to normal. She wasn't here to teach him any more lessons. The real lesson had already been learned not by Mike, but by Terri herself. The mechanic had learned a great deal in such a short amount of time. He had learned that assumptions were dangerous, and that respect was something earned not through appearance or status, but through the person's character and strength. And Terri, well, she didn't need to rub his face in it. Her actions had spoken louder than any words could. She didn't need to teach him any further. He had seen the truth in her quiet confidence. As she slid her card through the payment machine and signed the receipt, Mike gave her an awkward nod, his previous self-assuredness now tempered with genuine humility. He wasn't quite sure how to process the entire encounter, but he did know one thing: he would never again judge a book by its cover. Terri offered him a polite smile, nodding in return. It was a smile that said everything: a smile of understanding, of mutual respect, and of knowing exactly where she stood. Terri didn't linger in the parking lot. There was no need. She turned her car around and slowly pulled out of Harris Auto Repair, her thoughts clear and focused as the city streets blurred around her. The drive was long enough to reflect on everything that had happened. This wasn't about the car. It had never been about the car. Terri's mind wandered back to the countless times she had been dismissed, underestimated, or belittled by those who couldn't see beyond the surface. This moment, though seemingly small, was just another reminder of the constant battle she had fought, not just to succeed in the business world, but to assert her worth in a world that often tried to diminish it. For years, Terri had worked tirelessly to build Terri's Auto Sales into the powerhouse it was today. She had fought to ensure that no one could ever question her authority, her worth, or her expertise. Yet, despite all the success, there were always people like Mike who saw her first as a woman, and second as a businesswoman. They assumed that she was here because of her wealth, her appearance, or the perception of her being just another privileged person with a fancy car. But Terri wasn't just about appearances. She had earned everything she had. Every car, every contract, every success, none of it had been handed to her. She had built her empire with blood, sweat, and tears. She had sacrificed time with her family, faced impossible odds, and weathered countless storms. She had earned every inch of the respect she commanded. Driving away from the mechanic shop, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't about the work being done on her car. It was about asserting her identity, asserting her space, and making sure that no one could take that away. It didn't matter where she was or who she was dealing with. She deserved respect. This wasn't the first time she'd had to prove herself, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But it was a reminder that she didn't have to fight for respect through confrontation, through shouting or demanding. Her strength, her worth was already clear. All she had to do was show up, stand her ground, and make sure that people understood that she would not be diminished by their assumptions. And in that moment, driving away from Harris Auto Repair, Terri knew she was at peace with the path she had walked. Her journey wasn't defined by the people who doubted her. It was defined by the woman she had become. As she made her way back to the dealership, Terri's heart was lighter. She had fought for what mattered, not just her car or the job done, but her place in the world, her right to stand tall. And in that quiet victory, Terri knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. What happens when we're underestimated? when we're judged based on our appearance or our gender? How often do we let others decide our worth before we even have a chance to speak? Terri's story shows us that standing up for ourselves is the first step in changing the narrative. It's not just about fighting for respect, it's about earning it and knowing when to make your voice heard. Share this story if you believe it's time for us all to demand the respect we deserve. Don't stay silent. Don't let others define your value. Speak up.